Millionaire twin boys wouldn't eat until their new black male nanny did something. The widowed mother married him. That person will not touch my grandchildren's food. Beatrice Finch's piercing voice sliced through the opulent $4 million penthouse, her perfectly manicured hand gesturing dismissively at Jordan. Just look at him, Isabella. Do you truly believe someone like that understands how to care for children of our lineage? Jordan stood motionless at the entrance to the gleaming, minimalist kitchen, clutching his worn satchel with quiet dignity. At 32, a qualified pediatric social worker with a master's degree from Howard University, he had encountered prejudice before, but rarely with such raw, unbridled intensity. Isabella Hayes Finch, a widow for 8 months, shifted uncomfortably, caught between her formidable mother and the new male nanny she had just hired. Her 6-year-old twin boys, Oliver and Samuel, were once again refusing to eat, their slender frames growing worryingly thin since their father's death. 3 previous nannies, all white, all suitable according to Beatrice, had failed miserably. "Mother, please," Isabella attempted to interject, but was instantly cut off. "Don't give me that, Isabella. You hired this young man without even consulting me. These people have strange methods, exotic foods that could harm the children. What if he brings in diseases? What if? What if I can actually help your grandchildren?" Jordan interrupted gently, his calm voice a stark contrast to Beatrice's escalating hysteria. "Because so far, from what I can see, they're wasting away under the proper care you value so much." The silence that followed was chilling. Beatrice blanched at his audacity, while Isabella raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her new employee's unexpected firmness. From upstairs, the boys' soft, constant crying persisted, a mournful melody that had become the unwelcome soundtrack of their penthouse since the funeral. Jordan had grown up as the eldest of 3 in a working-class neighborhood in Atlanta. He'd worked part-time jobs since he was 16 to fund his education, specializing in childhood trauma after witnessing the struggles of children in his own community. He knew how to recognize children in mourning, and he knew exactly how to help them. But he also knew he was entering hostile territory. "Can I at least try?" he asked Isabella directly, completely disregarding Beatrice. 3 days? If in 3 days I can't get them to eat a full meal, I'll leave without causing any trouble." Beatrice scoffed indignantly. "Isabella, you can't seriously be considering." 3 days, Isabella agreed, extending her hand to Jordan. "But on one condition, my mother supervises everything." Jordan squeezed her hand, feeling the surprising softness of her skin, a stark contrast to the strength in her grip. "Perfect," he replied, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "She can learn a thing or two in the process." At that moment, as Beatrice choked on her indignation and Isabella watched him with a mixture of desperate hope and skepticism, Jordan maintained a serene expression. What they didn't know was that he had already researched the Hayes Finch family extensively, knew every detail of the children's trauma, and had a plan that went far beyond simply getting them to eat. This wasn't just a job, it was a mission. Within the first 15 minutes inside the Hayes Finch penthouse, Jordan had mentally cataloged every sign of emotional neglect that the other nannies had completely ignored. Oliver was hiding under a grand piano, clutching a faded teddy bear that clearly hadn't been cleaned in weeks. Samuel remained locked in his room, meticulously arranging toy soldiers only to sweep them violently into a pile. Classic behavior of a child processing trauma from abandonment. "Look," Beatrice pointed dramatically as Jordan knelt down to speak to Oliver at eye level. "This person is getting dust on my antique Persian rug. Isabella, do you see this?" Isabella watched Jordan talk softly to Oliver, who, for the first time in months, had stopped crying. "He seems to be connecting with the children, Mother." "Connecting?" Beatrice snorted. "These people have always been good for manual labor, groundskeeping. But taking care of children of our social class, that's completely different. Oliver and Samuel need refinement, a proper education, not these influences." Jordan pretended not to hear as Oliver whispered in his ear, "Grandma doesn't like you. She didn't like the last nanny because she was too old, the one before that because she was too quiet. And now, she doesn't like you because I'm black, Jordan finished naturally, without any hint of embarrassment. And what do you think about that? Oliver studied him with curious 6-year-old eyes. Daddy always said that people of different colors make the world more beautiful, like a mosaic. At that moment, Isabella felt something clench in her chest. Daniel, her late husband, really used to say that, something she had completely forgotten in the last few months of mourning. Beatrice, who had been listening intently, turned pale. Isabella, you can't let him put those ideas in the children's heads. They'll grow up thinking that. Thinking what exactly? Isabella interrupted, confronting her mother directly for the first time in months. That different people deserve respect? As the argument escalated in the living room, Jordan seized the opportunity to examine Samuel, who had ventured downstairs, drawn by the voices. The boy was visibly malnourished with deep circles under his eyes and a nervous tremor in his hands, signs Jordan recognized from his time working in the pediatric ward at Children's National Hospital in Washington, D.C. Samuel, he said softly, when was the last time you slept through the night? The boy looked at him in surprise. No one had ever asked him that question before. I don't remember. Sometimes I have nightmares that Daddy is lost and cold. Jordan nodded, understanding the pattern immediately. Abandonment trauma combined with survivor's guilt. Textbook. He had seen it dozens of times during his 10 years at the hospital, especially with children who had lost parents in sudden accidents. What if I told you a secret? He whispered conspiratorially. I also lost my dad when I was your age, and you know what I learned? Daddies are never really lost when they're in our hearts. Samuel watched him with an intensity that made Jordan realize he had touched something deep. Behind him, the argument between Isabella and Beatrice continued to escalate. He's been here less than an hour, and he's already brainwashing the children. Beatrice raved. This is exactly what I was talking about. They have their own methods, Isabella. Methods that don't suit our family. Methods? Isabella repeated, incredulous. You mean talking to them like human beings? Beatrice flushed crimson with anger. Don't give me that sarcasm. You know very well what I'm talking about. These people grow up in different environments, violent ones. They don't understand the subtleties of raising upper-class children. What if he causes trouble? What if the neighbors start talking? It was at that moment that Jordan made a decision. He stood up calmly, brushed off his trousers, and walked over to where Beatrice was gesticulating dramatically. Mrs. Finch, he said in a professionally calm voice that made everyone stop talking. You're right about one thing. I did grow up in a different environment than you did. Beatrice smiled triumphantly, thinking she had finally won. I grew up in a home where my mom worked 2 jobs to keep me in school, Jordan continued, where I studied pediatric social work on an academic merit scholarship, where I learned that traumatized children need understanding, not judgment, and where I discovered that the color of my skin never determined my ability to care for any child. The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella watched Jordan with a look that mixed admiration and shame for her mother's attitude. Social worker? She repeated. You have a master's in social work? Pediatric social work, specializing in child trauma, Jordan confirmed. I worked at Children's National Hospital for 10 years before moving here. Your children are showing classic signs of reactive depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. Nothing that can't be treated with patience and the proper protocol. Beatrice blanched. She had spent the last 15 minutes attacking a qualified healthcare professional based purely on racial prejudice. But you applied to be a nanny, she stammered. Because sometimes, Jordan replied with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. We need to be exactly where the universe wants us to be, and something tells me that these children need much more than just a nanny. In that moment, with Beatrice clearly disarmed and Isabella looking at him with a mixture of respect and curiosity, Jordan knew he had planted the first seed of his true mission there. What they didn't know yet was that his move to that town had not been a coincidence, and that his connection to the Hayes-Finch family ran much deeper than any of them could have imagined. Each of Beatrice's insults only strengthened something inside Jordan that the privileged woman couldn't see. A quiet determination fueled by years of injustice that had prepared him for this exact moment when he would finally have the opportunity to prove that underestimating someone because of the color of their skin would be the biggest mistake the Finches had ever made. Over the next 3 days, something extraordinary began to happen at the Hayes Finch penthouse. For the first time in 8 months, Oliver and Samuel not only ate full meals, but asked for seconds. Jordan had implemented what he called an emotional reconnection protocol, a technique he had refined while working with bereaved children at the hospital. Impossible, Beatrice muttered, watching from the living room window as Jordan played in the rooftop garden with the children. He must be giving them some kind of sedative. This isn't natural. Isabella, on the other hand, couldn't take her eyes off the scene. It had been months since she had seen her children laugh like that. Jordan had turned a simple lunch into a fun experience, teaching Oliver and Samuel how to make animal-shaped sandwiches while telling them engaging stories about nutrition that the boys absorbed like sponges. "Does he have a degree from a real university?" Beatrice asked suspiciously when Isabella mentioned Jordan's qualifications over dinner, because those historically black institutions don't always have the same standards as our elite universities. "Howard University, Mother. One of the best in the country for pediatric medicine," Isabella replied, pouring herself more wine, "and he graduated with highest honors." Beatrice snorted. "Highest honors or not, Isabella, you need to think about the children's future. The neighbors are already talking. Mrs. Albright called me yesterday asking about the new male staff member. You know how these things spread in our community." Just then, Jordan appeared at the dining room door holding a tablet. "Mrs. Hayes, Finch, I need to talk to you about the children's progress. It's hospital protocol to document everything." Isabella motioned for him to come closer, but Beatrice stood up abruptly. "Isabella, this can wait. We have family matters to discuss." "Actually," Jordan said calmly, sliding the tablet across the table, "this is a family matter. Oliver has gained 1.5 kg in 3 days. Samuel has stopped having nightmares, and both have shown significant signs of recovery from the trauma of abandonment." Isabella took the tablet, impressed by the detailed documentation Jordan had prepared. Weight charts, behavioral analyses, photographs of the children smiling, all meticulously recorded with timestamps and technical observations. "Where did you learn to write reports like this?" she asked, genuinely impressed. "Standard hospital protocol," Jordan replied. "We always document progress in cases of childhood trauma, but there's something else I need to discuss with you." Beatrice sat back down, clearly uncomfortable with the professional competence Jordan displayed with every interaction. "Samuel told me something interesting today," Jordan continued, watching both their reactions. "He said his father used to sing a specific song to them to help them fall asleep. 'Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star,' but in a different version. He called it the Black Daddy song." The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella blanched, dropping the tablet on the table. Beatrice froze like marble. I don't understand," Isabella stammered. "Children have interesting memories," Jordan said softly. "Sometimes they remember things adults would rather forget." Samuel also mentioned that his dad had a special friend who sang to them when he was very sick. At that moment, Jordan's phone vibrated. It was a message he had been waiting for since he arrived in the city. "Excuse me," he said, looking at the screen. "I have to take this. It's important." Jordan left the room and answered the call in the garden, where he knew he wouldn't be overheard. "Dr. Anya Sharma," he said quietly into the phone. "Yes, I got access to the medical records. No, they don't suspect anything yet. Yes, doctor. The children confirmed everything we expected. Daniel really did tell them about Marcus." On the other end of the line, Dr. Anya Sharma, Jordan's former supervisor at Children's National Hospital, sighed heavily. "Jordan, are you sure about this? Accusing a high society family of hiding information about a death is very serious." "Doctor, you know that Daniel Hayes, Finch, did not die from a sudden heart attack," Jordan said firmly. "He died from complications of a rare autoimmune disease that he had been hiding from his family for months." And Marcus Brown, the private nurse who had been treating him secretly, disappeared mysteriously 3 days before Daniel's death. Marcus Brown, who happened to be, Dr. Sharma began. My older brother, Jordan finished, and I came here to find out not only what happened to him, but why a millionaire family would make a black man disappear after he devoted himself to caring for a terminal patient. Through the living room window, Isabella watched Jordan on the phone, noticing the seriousness on his face. Something about his posture, the way he held the phone, suggested that this conversation was much more important than a simple business call. Mother, she said slowly, do you remember the private nurse Daniel hired during the last months of his life? The one who came to take care of him when we thought he was just overworked? Beatrice turned pale. Why are you asking me this now, Isabella? Because, Isabella replied, watching Jordan end the call and walk back into the penthouse, I have a feeling that our new nanny knows a lot more about our family than he's letting on. When Jordan returned to the room, he had a different expression. Still professional, still controlled, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a quiet determination that made Beatrice shift uncomfortably in her chair. Sorry for the interruption, Jordan said, putting away his phone. It was a call about an old case at the hospital. Sometimes the past catches up with us in unexpected ways. Isabella and Beatrice exchanged a quick glance, both realizing that this comment carried a weight that went far beyond its superficial words. Well, Beatrice said, forcing a smile, I think we've discussed enough for today. Isabella, didn't you say you had important calls to make? But Isabella couldn't stop watching Jordan, trying to decipher what had changed in his expression after that call. There was something about him, something she couldn't quite put her finger on, that made her feel simultaneously drawn to him and slightly uneasy. Jordan smiled kindly at them both. I'm going to check on the children before retiring. Good evening, Mrs. Hayes. Finch. Mrs. Finch. As he climbed the stairs, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that she had just witnessed the moment when a key piece of a much larger puzzle had fallen into place. What she didn't know was that Jordan Brown hadn't arrived at that penthouse by chance, and that the conversation she just witnessed was only the first move in a game he'd been planning for much longer than any of them could have imagined. Each of Beatrice's insults only strengthened something inside Jordan that the privileged woman couldn't see. A quiet determination fueled by years of injustice that had prepared him for this exact moment, when he would finally have the opportunity to prove that underestimating someone because of the color of their skin would be the biggest mistake the Finches had ever made. On Friday morning, exactly 1 week after his arrival, Jordan came down to breakfast carrying a worn leather briefcase and a tablet. Isabella immediately noticed the change in his demeanor. There was something definitive in his movements, as if a long game had finally come to an end. Good morning, he greeted calmly, serving pancakes to Oliver and Samuel, who ran to hug him as they had done every morning since he arrived. Beatrice, who had just entered the kitchen, stopped when she saw the briefcase. What's that? Are you quitting? Because if you are, I always said that. Actually, Jordan interrupted her gently, I came to return something that has belonged to this family for a long time. He opened the briefcase and took out a photograph, placing it on the minimalist countertop. Isabella approached and blanched instantly. It was a photo of Daniel in the hospital, clearly very ill, next to a black man in scrubs who was holding his hand affectionately. Do you know this person? Jordan asked, watching their reaction. Beatrice stood rigid as a statue. Isabella took the photo with trembling hands. That's Marcus Brown, Jordan continued, his voice still calm, but laced with something dangerous. Palliative care nurse specializing in rare diseases. He took care of Daniel during the last 6 months of his life when you thought he was just overworked. I don't understand, Isabella stammered, but her eyes revealed that she understood perfectly. Marcus Brown is my older brother, Jordan revealed, and the silence that followed was deafening, and he disappeared 3 days before Daniel died. Curiously, on the same day, Daniel signed a will significantly altering the children's inheritance. Beatrice finally found her voice. This is blackmail. Isabella, call the police. Blackmail? Jordan laughed humorlessly, pulling more documents from the folder. Let's see what real blackmail is. He spread papers across the counter. Here are the bank transfers you made to Marcus. $75,000 for discretion about Daniel's diagnosis. Here, the confidentiality agreement you forced him to sign. And here. Jordan paused dramatically, pulling out a digital recording. The phone conversation where you, Beatrice, threatened to report Marcus to the Board of Nursing for practicing medicine illegally if he didn't disappear immediately after Daniel's death. Isabella let out a sound of shock. Mother, you didn't do that. She did, Jordan confirmed, pressing play on the audio. Beatrice's shrill voice echoed through the kitchen. Listen carefully, you insolent black boy. Daniel is dead. You got your dirty money. Now get out of here before I make sure you lose your license and never work in this city again, like the opportunistic intruder you are. Isabella's face went completely white. Beatrice tried to deny it, but the words simply wouldn't come out. Marcus had to flee the city within 24 hours. Jordan continued relentlessly. He abandoned his life, his apartment, his dreams of setting up a community clinic for patients in need. All because a privileged woman decided that a black nurse who knew her family's secrets was a threat. You can't prove any of this, Beatrice managed to whisper. Jordan smiled coldly. I can, and I will. You know what the beauty of modern technology is, Beatrice? Marcus recorded everything. Every conversation, every threat, every bank transfer. He knew people like you would try to silence him. Isabella leaned against the counter, clearly in shock. Daniel had an autoimmune disease for 6 months? Advanced, aggressive, and rare. Jordan confirmed softly. He wanted to protect you from the pain of watching him waste away. Marcus respected that decision, even though he knew he would be vilified for it later. And you came here to what? Get revenge? Beatrice asked, trying to regain some control. I came to get justice for my brother, Jordan corrected, and to ensure that Oliver and Samuel grow up knowing the truth about how their father really died, surrounded by love and professional care. Not alone from a sudden heart attack as you preferred to believe. At that moment, Jordan addressed Isabella directly. Your husband left letters for the children, Isabella. One for each birthday until they turn 18. Marcus had them, but he had to run away before he could give them to them. They're here. He tapped the folder. Isabella began to cry silently. Daddy? Oliver approached, sensing the tension in the air. Why are you sad? Beatrice, realizing she was losing everything, made one last desperate attempt. Isabella, you can't believe this opportunist. He came here with a plan from the beginning. Yes, I did, Jordan admitted without hesitation. I came to find out what happened to my brother. But I also came because 2 innocent children were suffering because of the toxic secrets you kept. And in the process, I found something I didn't expect. He looked directly at Isabella. I found a good woman who deserves to know the truth about the extraordinary man she lost. And 2 children who deserve to grow up honoring their father's real memory, not a sanitized version created to protect a family's pride. Isabella approached Jordan, her eyes red but determined. What do you want? Money? Compensation for your brother? I want Marcus to be able to come home, Jordan replied simply. I want him to receive the recognition he deserves for caring for Daniel with such dedication when his own family chose to live in denial. And I want Beatrice to face the legal consequences of her threats and discrimination. Beatrice exploded. You can't do that. I have lawyers. I have connections. And I have the truth. Jordan replied calmly. Recorded, documented, and witnessed. Plus, I have something your connections can't buy. A clear conscience for having fought for what's right. In that moment, as Beatrice realized her world of privilege was crumbling, and Isabella began to understand the extent of what she had lost, Jordan knew that justice would finally be served. But the real victory wouldn't be Beatrice's downfall. It would be seeing Marcus able to return home with his head held high, and Oliver and Samuel growing up knowing the truth about their father's unconditional love. 6 months later, the headline in a national newspaper read, Heiress convicted of racial discrimination and threats. $2 million. Fine. Beatrice Finch had lost not only the lawsuit but also her position on 5 charity boards and the respect of the entire social elite she valued so much. She had to sell the penthouse to pay the damages, Isabella told Jordan as they watched Oliver and Samuel play in the garden of their new home. Smaller, cozier, more real. And she moved to a modest apartment across town. It seems she discovered that money can't buy dignity when you've lost all of yours. Jordan smiled, adjusting the engagement ring Isabella had given him the previous month. She had proposed in the kitchen amid burnt toast and children's laughter, exactly how he had always dreamed true love would be. "And Marcus?" Isabella asked, as she had every week since Jordan's brother had returned to the city. "He's opening his community clinic next week." Jordan replied proudly, "With the settlement money and donations from people who heard his story, he'll be treating underprivileged children for free, exactly the dream Beatrice almost destroyed." Marcus had become a minor national celebrity after the story broke. Newspaper interviews, invitations to speak about discrimination in the healthcare system, and most importantly, public recognition that he had been an exceptional nurse, unjustly persecuted because of racial prejudice. "Mommy, Jordan!" Oliver ran to hug them, using the nickname he had invented that melted both their hearts every time. "Uncle Marcus is here." Marcus Brown walked through the garden carrying a box wrapped in colorful paper. At 38, he had finally regained the sparkle in his eyes that Jordan hadn't seen since before his forced escape from the city. "The letters," Marcus announced solemnly, handing the box to Isabella. "Daniel wrote one for each birthday until they were 18. He wanted you to know how much he loved you, even when he couldn't be there." Isabella held the box with trembling hands, finally understanding the depth of love her husband had felt for her and the children. Did he know he was dying? "For the last 3 months? Yes," Marcus replied gently. "But he also knew you would be all right, especially after he met Jordan." "He met Jordan?" Samuel asked, confused. Marcus smiled. "Your dad saw a picture of my little brother when I showed it to him in the hospital. He said, 'That guy has the eyes of someone who truly cares for people.' If Isabella ever needs someone special in her life, I hope it's someone like him." The silence that followed was filled only by the wind in the trees and the distant sound of children laughing in the neighborhood. "So Daddy knew," Oliver whispered. "Daddies always know," Jordan replied, hugging both children. "And he chose well. He chose for you to grow up with lots of love." 3 days later, during the inauguration of the Marcus Brown Clinic for Community Pediatric Care, a crowd gathered to support the new entrepreneur. Isabella was the first official donor, contributing $150,000 from her own pocket. "It's the least I can do," she said into the microphone during the ceremony. "To make up for the mistakes of the past and support a future where no competent professional is judged by the color of their skin instead of their qualifications." Across town, Beatrice watched the live broadcast on her cell phone from her small 2-bedroom apartment. Alone, morally and financially bankrupt, she finally understood that prejudice had cost her much more than her fortune. It had cost her her family. That night, as Jordan put Oliver and Samuel to bed, he reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought him there. He had arrived at that penthouse as a temporary nanny, seeking justice for his brother. Now he was about to become a husband and stepfather, and he had helped build something much bigger. "Do you regret anything?" Isabella asked when he came downstairs. "That I waited so long to come here," Jordan replied without hesitation. "Marcus suffered 2 unnecessary years because I took so long to gather the courage to investigate what really happened. And I regret that it took me so long to realize that the most extraordinary man I've ever met was right in front of me," Isabella said, pulling him into a hug. In the end, Beatrice Finch had tried to use privilege and prejudice to silence a talented black man. Instead, she had only revealed her own moral mediocrity and paved the way for 2 extraordinary brothers to turn an injustice into an inspiring victory. The real irony was that in trying to keep Marcus in his place, Beatrice had created the perfect conditions for both Marcus and Jordan to achieve far greater success and recognition than they would have if they had never been challenged by her ignorance. Jordan learned that sometimes the best revenge is not to destroy those who hurt you. It is to build something so beautiful and impactful that their malice becomes just a small obstacle you overcame on your way to greatness.